Hello, everyone. Hi, Mick.
Hello, Leah. Hello, everyone.
So I'm just gonna give a little introduction while we wait for people to start joining the meeting. So this is our first AMA with the lovely Mik Kersten, author of Project to Product, as part of our book club featuring the same book. We're really excited to work with Mick and everything that he's done with value stream management, Tasktop, his research. We loved the book when it came out, and we've loved to see how much the book has grown and continued over the last, is it 2 years now? 2.5?
Yeah, we're almost into 2.5 years. It was November.
Right?
Yeah.
And we are still rather anticipating what you have next, Mick. As always.
Well, there've been lots of learnings from the book, so that's good news.
Excellent. So just to give everyone a quick rundown of kind of how we usually handle this, as you can see, we're in webinar mode in Zoom. So while you can see us, we can't see you. Many of you have already posted some questions in Slack over in the AMA channel, so we'll be starting with some of those, but you're also welcome to add additional questions right here in Zoom. Feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask your questions, or you can drop them in the chat too. I'm sure we'll find them. So we're going to be chatting for about 45 minutes or so. We'll try to get through as many of your questions as we can in that time. We'll also be recording this and we'll post it in the book club Slack after the fact. So a little later this afternoon. If you weren't able to make it or you wanted to share with a colleague, you're welcome to. So with that, Mick, I think we're going to get started with one of the questions that was put over on the Slack channel the other day. It's kind of a nice, easy one to get started, I think. So this is a question around flow time from Robert Harwood. He's wanting to know, when should flow time start? Is it when a feature is defined? If that's the case, does all the time consumed in lean portfolio management, assuming safe, not count? If we measure flow time for an epic, then is it from funnel to first MVP deployment? And then we only measure features for the minimal viable increments? So yeah, Mick, over to you.
So I think I've got two answers to this question, and I'll answer the conceptually, which the goal of the flow framework, and then just pragmatically, I think it's the key thing I've noticed in terms of deployments of the flow framework is just how important it is to be very deliberate and conscious and communicative about when flow time starts. So let me start conceptually, and the idea is that we've got these all of these metrics, the lead time, flow time, cycle time, they do come from lean, right? So I think in the Agile and DevOps community, we've sort of focused in on lead time and cycle time, but the lean community and manufacturing have actually always used the notion of flow time. So flow time starts when work starts. Lead time starts when a request is made, and then cycle time is really what flow time is composed of, is all the different steps. So I think the key thing is we've got a very clear definition, and this has been the interesting thing that I really tried to make sure that the flow framework helps us with, which is some of the things that have been very easy that have been done. Like we always know when flow time starts. Sorry, when lead time starts, when the request is made. The flow framework says we actually have to do the work to determine when flow time starts. So again, conceptually, flow time starts when work has started. So you've got this big request backlog. And what we know that's very different about software and technology is that the size of our backlogs is massive. So we've got only measuring lead times insufficient, because so many requests are effectively never fulfilled. They're just going on to these ever-growing backlogs. And this is true for successful companies as well. My own experience with it came from open source, where I realized, we were a fairly small team building open source development tools, and our ability to take work through a value stream versus the fact we had millions of users, right? We were a few people with millions of users. So we literally had thousands and thousands at any point in time, tens of thousands at some point in the time, requests in our backlogs for work to get done, features to get implemented, bugs to get fixed, and we can only ever do a tiny fraction of them. So I realized, okay, well, our lead time is infinitely long. We'll never finish all these things. Apple's lead time is infinitely long with all the requests that have been made of them over the years. We got dark mode. There's still a lot of other things that people want implemented. So lead time is important to understand, but sometimes it's not as meaningful, because unlike the way that Tesla takes car orders, not every request will get fulfilled of a technology team or organization or a value stream. So the key thing with flow time, if I relate it back to my open source team, is when we started the work, and when we started any work. And this is really the way I think about it: when any work starts on any of the flow items. So even if you're just doing design or conceptual work, or analyzing, doing some business analysis, work has started. Anytime any member, and this is what's so important about value streams, they're not just about the agile team or the feature team. They're about, the value stream is value streams are people. And it's when any person has started any work on this thing, even if it's highly conceptual work, design work, and actually might never make it to the development team because it was decided that it's not worth implementing. So that's when it starts. It starts when a human being, when one of your colleagues has started work on the thing, flow time starts.
Excellent. Thank you, Mik. All right, on to our second question. This is from Gunther Casper. His question is, how can someone outside management support upper management in understanding that IT should not work in projects in most cases and should not be managed as a cost center?
So, right. So I think in the end, and this is a super important question, because I think a lot of people who have looked at the book and read the book are outside of management, right? And that was an important thing to me. The key thing is we know that when these concepts apply, that work gets better, it gets easier for people, things start to improve. When bottlenecks get in the way of your day-to-day work, or when you finally get that chance to reduce some of that technical debt that's been so frustrating, things start feeling better. And I wanted people that feeling. And of course, Gene articulated it much better in terms of in the Unicorn project. I actually brought some of these concepts to life, how bad things can feel and how great they can feel when they start improving. So the way I think I just encourage you, and this is really the point of the flow framework, is to make it easier to make the economic case to leadership with this. So I see, what I often see is teams or individuals within technology who are just very aware and very frustrated, are very dismayed that these piles of technical debt and legacy systems are just not getting better. So there's talk of things going agile and deploying new methodologies, but things they don't feel like they're getting better, and they're probably not getting better. So the key thing I think here is to make it, and this is really the point of the flow framework, is to provide a high level and simpler language that makes sense to management and to leadership and to the business side, because it's related to business value. So I'll take the example of the technical debt story. So when I think a lot of us have had experience saying, like, well, we've got too much technical debt, but nothing's happening, because fundamentally the customer doesn't see technical debt. They don't care about technical debt. So people closer to the customer, such as management, leadership, product owners, and so on, they also, I'm speaking a little broadly here, but they also don't care about technical debt, because they don't see any benefit of reducing technical debt, because technical debt is not visible. So in the flow framework, the whole point of having these flow metrics and having them connected to these business results, and it's like the business results will be measured by, in many companies now, the common way of measuring them is OKRs, objective key results. So I can speak in terms of those, but any kind of KPIs or metrics. So the way that I've seen really work is to make the economic case to say, if we spend this portion of this release cycle, and say it's got to be high, we spend 40% of this particular release cycle investing in these technical debt reduction, we expect Y, and the Y has to be something meaningful. So if we spend X, we expect the outcome to be Y. And then what the outcome can be is, for example, is faster feature flow in the next release cycle. So you'll actually get more capacity will be dedicated for features. You're paying now because we have to invest in technical debt reduction, but the payoff for that will be more feature velocity. And so that's an economic case for investing in technical debt. And as soon as the moment, and I've seen this over and over, the moment that the business or the customer sees or leadership sees that capacity was higher than it was previously, all of a sudden the conversation changes, versus it always being, Like, oh, well, we have to get the next quarter and the next quarter and the next quarter. Another beautiful example I've seen, and this is for in some customers that we've worked with for doing, for just doing cloud migrations. So they've got some initial applications into their cloud. And of course, the teams, as they did that, there was pressure to get those things done quickly. The teams took some shortcuts, as they should, in terms of how storage is done, how compute is handled. And so the case that I saw one of these teams make, and they actually, they actually captured this as an OKR, saying our OKR for this release cycle is to reduce the storage costs, the hosting costs, and cut them cut 70% out of our hosting costs. And they did. They actually did the technical debt investment. And the hosting costs for this application, which get really large, these cost bubbles happen, will reduce that significantly. So again, there's that investment is tied, the investment in flow of a certain type of flow item is tied to an economic outcome. And it's then celebrated is the key thing. It's visible and it's celebrated. So that's what I find. So I think it really something that you can arm yourselves with using the flow framework, again, to make that economic case with it really in the end an economic payoff. So
excellent, thank you. Okay, now our next question is going to be from over in Slack. We're slowly making the transition in some areas to product. Often we're still determining what is an old way of working or outdated managerial framework. RACI became a very popular managerial mechanism in our organization in the last 5 years. Is RACI helpful in product? Is there a distinction between using it for software means of production and the actual run operational aspect of the software product itself? And I think this question can be linked to probably any framework and how helpful or not it is.
Right. Yes. So I think this is the key thing, is that your organization will have these business frameworks, processes, and I think, yeah, exactly. And I think the key thing is that the flow framework is a way of measuring, right? So you'll have all of these different managerial frameworks. I believe for those who don't, it's the responsibility assignment matrix that we're looking at here. So I think the key thing is, again, as you're moving to these, you're applying these new management frameworks, you're making this shift from project to product, you might be changing business processes as well. What the goal of the flow framework is to allow you to see the effectiveness of that, right? So I'll give you an example. The call I was on earlier this morning, it's a large organizations kind of celebrated as a sort of leader in technology, one of the enterprise leaders in technology. They've actually adopted the shift from project to product, but as they did that, and they've celebrated it, as they did that, they actually kept a lot of their existing business processes and their organizational silos stayed. So they brought in some product managers. They changed things slightly, but as I was examining what the current state of the organization was, it actually hadn't fixed a lot of the handoffs or silos that they had previously before they shifted to product. So the whole point is, we've got our organizations are under a lot of pressure to change. There's whether we've got leadership or consultants, there's these reorganizations happening, new processes, new frameworks, and so on being implemented. And really the key goal and contribution of the flow framework is to be able to measure the outcomes of that and figure out how to apply them. So for example, whether you're deploying RACI, whether you're shifting to product, whether you're doing other kinds of engineering, so you're deploying the scaled agile framework, the key thing is to measure, so to have a way the baselining is saying, and I'll just use one flow metric in terms of flow time. I think it's one of if you're going to pick one, pick flow time. So flow time is the time to value metric. Flow time is a metric that, I'm glad that was the first question. Flow time is that metric that says how quickly we're bringing things to market. And so it embodies that. If you think of the 3 ways of DevOps: flow, how quickly we're flowing things; feedback, how quickly we learn from what we delivered to the customer; and then of course the learning associated with that, the continuous learning. So I actually highly recommend anyone who's implementing any framework, including the shift from project to product, is for those value streams that are undergoing a change to always be measuring flow time. And because what will happen is, if some of these applying some of these frameworks, like take the scaled agile framework. People are often blame the scaled agile framework for some of their agile transformation not working. But then if you actually start digging in, what they've often done is either A, change no processes, be focused on the parts of SAFe, which are just around the ceremonies of SAFe, not actually the goals of SAFe, of delivering more value to customers and learning more quickly and getting towards business agility. But if you're actually, if you're not measuring some kind of value metric as you're deploying these things, it's very easy to have them go sideways or backwards, where you'll be deploying SAFe, you'll be deploying ICI, you'll be deploying the shift from project to product, and it's actually taking longer. You'll be deploying cloud, actually. You'll be moving to cloud, and it's taking longer to get value to the customer because you're not optimizing around flow time. If you just optimize around shortening flow time, it'll actually be the right kind of guide, and it'll give you a sense, did deploying RCI help us or was not quite the right fit? Same with SAFe. Did we actually deploy in a way that shortened our time to value, shortened the flow time, or did we go sideways somewhere where we over focused on the ceremonies of SAFe rather than the goals of SAFe? So we over focused on how we're doing our PI planning rather than, again, focusing on actual business agility. So and this is really where the flow framework is just a very different framework than all these methodology frameworks and the rest. It's really meant to help you visualize and measure your value streams. So whatever improvement initiatives you've got, whatever reorganizations you've got, you actually always have a way of knowing, are we bringing more value to the customer or are we actually slowing down?
Yeah, in the end, everything's about value, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and a consistent and common measure of value. So,
excellent. Thank you, Mik. Okay, next question. On what is a value stream on page 70 of your book, there is a description of what defines a product. I have to deal with legacy applications that are shaped based on old organization structures, including vendors, with an architecture that is mirroring it, i.e. Conroy's Law. A perfect example of how to violate the locality and simplicity principle. In a brand new architecture and implementation, it would be relatively easy to define the product. In my case, would the product or products be defined as they are, fractured parts of what otherwise would be one or two products?
That's a really good question. Okay, so and I think it's good that the ideal was brought up. One of the 5 ideals was brought up there, because I think this is the way I look at this is we've got this kind of idealized view of what products and value streams should be, and then we've got reality, right? Where the reality is these legacy systems. Some of them are outsourced. Some of them, they still need attention. And so I think the key thing is just to be very pragmatic about defining and measuring your value streams. So when I work with large customers, I think a really good practice I see is that they will actually take these legacy systems and they will start measuring the flow of their old waterfall legacy value streams, just so you've got visibility on it. And then in parallel, you start structuring, looking at what the product portfolio should be. So I think the key thing is those are there, and the mapping can be complex, right? When there's an organization who's got 3,000 different applications, 1,000 of them are legacy or 2,000 of them are legacy. And it's like the question, exactly as the question said, is like it's easy for greenfields, but the greenfields problem is a lot less interesting. So I think the main thing is apply that concept of value streams, because you know what they are. You just described them, right? You've got these legacy, maybe these outsourced, these maintenance mode value streams, and so you should still treat them as value streams. And they might just not be nicely aligned to what the organization's product portfolio is, but I actually think it's really important to identify them, to measure their flow, and to actually just, in some cases, you might not improve them. One of the things that one of the practices, for example, I really like and I included a reference to Zone to Win in Project to Product, because I think a great practice introduced in that book on zone management is when you've got any large organization has a lot of legacy value streams, and organizations who apply the right principles of product thinking actually very actively sunset and move away from those. So in that book, Jeffrey Moore actually suggests that you have a separate general manager whose entire responsibility is killing off old value streams, old products, right? Because it's not easy to do. You've got customers, you've got maintenance, and so on. So the key thing is just treat those as first class. I know we've got, I'll give an example from Tasktop. We've got a technology called Tasktop Sync. Which is built on old Eclipse technologies and so on. It's still deployed in some places. We've desperately tried to move some customers from it, but we're actually still treating it as a first-class value stream. It's still getting the right kinds of updates, and we've got the visibility. Where, of course, the flow time for Tasktop Sync, I don't care if it's 4 months, unless, of course, there's some serious defect in it or something of that sort. But it's super stable. It's running. It's still doing a job for some customers who haven't moved on to some of our newer products. But we treat it as very first class. We just have very different business goals for it. We're not trying to accelerate its flow time. Right? We're not trying to get more velocity. All we want out of it is stability and the quality. So I think basically just consider just this as a part of your portfolio. And notably, I think the question was really well stated, is it won't be nicely aligned to the overall product portfolio. But again, I think that's okay.
Yeah, excellent. I like what you said about how, not every value stream, not every product is going to have the same goals. And it's not always about accelerating. Sometimes it is just the goal is stability. Just keep the status quo.
Exactly. And that, I think that's the true product and value stream mindset, right? Which is that you're defining these different goals. And that was, to me, this big reaction, how transformations were happening, is like, we have to move everything to cloud tomorrow. We have to, we need to accelerate flow time everywhere. We need A/B testing everywhere. And that's just not reality for these large legacy and complex software portfolios. So again, it's in the end, your portfolio itself, you should have a roadmap for, with some things which you're just going to leave alone. Some things you layer APIs over, some things you'll sunset and move off more deliberately, because you'll take sunsetting those things as a first class initiative. And then just having the right kind of visibility for that is important, where again, you don't focus on improvements. So versus where you do.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, next question. You write that adoption is a useful metric for measuring platforms and central components. I also could imagine happiness to be useful, but what other metrics exist for measuring the value of a central platform?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think so over the past 2.5 years, I have definitely found myself in presenting the book and the concepts, putting a lot more emphasis. I do think that, I don't know whether it's something that's, and Leah, we should look at this at some point, whether I should have emphasized this in the book more, or whether it's just too easy to ignore. But the internal products, so basically you've got your business and customer, you've got your customer facing products. Oftentimes you'll have these internal products that face the business, kind of HR, reporting, other functions. Those are first class products. And then of course the key thing is that the platform products themselves, in a technology organizations, they're even more important than the customer facing products. They enable all those customer facing products, right? That's what good technology companies, tech giants, startups, they tend to invest more in the platform products, the APIs, the shared services, the data pipelines, and the rest, than even in the external facing products, because again, those power everything. And when we actually, we see this very clearly empirically, when we measure product value streams, we will see that the bottlenecks, once you've resolved the easier bottlenecks, like way too much flow load, too much work in progress, those kinds of things, are dependencies. And usually the dependencies are on the platform products. There's this kind of, I think, endemic underinvestment in platform products and APIs in enterprise organizations who have over-focused, again, on just delivering the next thing to the business, and throwing things over the fence. So I think the key thing is to establish that, first of all, the number one thing is make those internal products. And by the way, I should mention one more thing. Then there's the next layer below that, which is the delivery platforms themselves, the pipelines, everything we talk about in the DevOps community, the tool chains, those also need to be a first-class product. So I think the key thing is make each of those a first-class product. And each of them has a roadmap, has a backlog, and then to the point of the question, has these value metrics. So of course, we're going to measure the happiness of those teams, but we're also going to measure some kind of value metric that you assign. And that, again, it really depends. And in my view, that should be set by those value streams themselves, right? is the value metric going to be around SLAs? Because this is more of a kind of an operations SRE type function that we're providing in this platform. Are we trying to move off an internal legacy platform onto a new set of microservices? Well, if so, adoption of those microservices by the business and customer facing products, well, that can be a great metric, right? How much adoption are we seeing, so that we can actually chart out when we can shut off the old legacy platform and the rest. And I think the key thing is that once you made it, just those value metrics, they become a key part of the release planning for those platforms. So just again, make them first class, do the roadmaps, and then the roadmaps and the value metrics fundamentally will be how those platforms best serve the things that depend on them. So in some cases it'll be a scale value metric, a performance, a reliability. It truly depends what kind of platform you're building. But I think it's been too easy to ignore having that value metric, which is why, again, I think the Flow framework tries to emphasize the importance of doing that for the internal facing products as well. So
thank you. Looks like we've got a question over here on in the Zoom chat, so we'll go with that one next. What can prevent the use of the Flow framework, and what should be done to use it? Kind of a broad question, but a good one.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. So I think one of the Flow framework, the goal is to tie technology and business together, and to help establish this new operating model that's around flow and value streams instead of being around activities and tracking activities and costs. So I think what prevents the use is the old model, is that you'll have this immune system around the old way of doing things, right? Where again, we see failed agile DevOps transformations often will happen because the IT functions being asked to transform, rather than, again, the whole business embracing this notion of value streams. So I think the number one thing where I see it either slow down or fail, well, I don't know if it's probably too early to say we've actually seen failures. I should think about this a little bit more. Again, I can't currently think of failed deployments of the Flow framework. I'm sure that will happen, but where I see that it hasn't provided enough value quickly enough, and it really is when technology is treated as that silo, when the organization it seems like things have changed, but they haven't. What's still happening is features and requirements are being thrown over the fence, and there isn't, again, some kind of agile or project to product or DevOps transformations claim to have happened without the business side acting any differently. It's only happened around the agile teams and the technology teams. And again, that's where the Flow framework is actually meant to point out is if you're doing that, you haven't adopted the Flow framework, which is why I focus so much on this notion of flow time. If flow time is only in development, well, no, that's cycle time, right? And then we've actually not changed the way the business functions. Things are still being thrown over the fence, and the business is not actually seeing the dynamics of technology of the software teams. And because of course we know one of the I think the biggest, what's the biggest surprise? It's definitely the biggest finding, and it is to me a surprising finding, is that in basically every deployment of the Flow framework at an enterprise level, where you've got more than say 1,000 to 30,000 IT staff, the number one problem that we see is too much work in progress, which we measure as too much flow load. So and that actually comes from that things of flowing over, throwing things over the fence. So if you're not basically able to deploying the Flow framework, actually measuring flow time allows you to and showing the real capacity of this value stream. So through flow load, actually forces the organization to deal with that. So again, the whole goal is, if you're deploying it, you're forcing the organization to deal with saying, no, there isn't the capacity of these kinds of things. And the more things we throw over the fence, the fewer things we get done. So again, our economic model of how software and technology work on the business side is fundamentally broken when you start actually seeing the real flow metrics. So that forces change, but then of course in some organization that change is slow to happen, and that's where I would say these things slow down. So you need, but yeah, that's really the whole goal here, is to make that the need for that change impossible to ignore.
Excellent. Okay, that might kind of segue nicely over into this other question. It's a little bit of a long one, but stick with me. I could use some clarification on when flow time starts. A customer problem request will move into a discovery phase early on in its life cycle. At that point, a lot of important product management work is beginning to understand the problem and align to outcomes we're trying to achieve, develop options, research, and reduce risk of moving forward. Eventually, if we decide to move forward, we have a vision and can break that work into minimum value increments and features as part of a delivery phase. Is flow time only capturing work in this later phase? If so, aren't we missing a lot of insight into the flow of work through the discovery phase? On the other hand, if we do include discovery phase work, how do we account for all of the work we abandon as we refine our vision, or the fact that we don't yet have features defined to measures and track state flow? Bottom line, I'm trying to better understand how we're tracking the flow of work through the value stream when our flow items, in this case features, are not yet defined, or if we are deliberately excluding this phase of work in the overall value stream.
Yeah, so I see both. Again, a great question. And I think my guidance is include the discovery phase. So, and it's just got, so again, if value streams are not just development, they're end to end. So the discovery, the design phase, where you want to fail fast in some cases where it makes no sense to implement this thing, that absolutely should be included. It's just that the definition of done, you have to be, so I think that the flow time starts actually easier if you just use that same heuristic I said, which is value streams are people. And when people start doing work, flow time starts. So when people start doing analysis, start brainstorming, start talking about this potential new, interesting new feature, flow time starts. And then I think the more interesting question is actually, when does flow time stop? Because a lot of those things won't make it to the quote unquote end of the value stream where you've got running software. So and this is where I think project development was potentially a bit under precise, which I did think we covered it, but if not, Leah, again, another thing we should look into. But the bottom line is, and there is the flow framework FAQ for some of these things on flowframework.org that you can dig into as well. But so when that work doesn't actually make it to the development team because it didn't make it to the MVP, but a bunch of exploratory work was done on it, you basically stop it, and it has been done, but it has not been implemented in software, and that's okay. Work was still done. We should celebrate the fact, and then it's obviously better to have some of these things that took where we had to failed fast. So we basically celebrate the fact that in 2 weeks we realized no customer would really want this. Why? Like, it seemed like a good idea, but it's not. So let's close it out. Won't implement, or whatever state you use in your planning tool, and it still had a start and stop of its flow time. And it's better if that was 2 weeks in which we learned that than if it was 2 months because we actually implemented it and then it still didn't produce the right outcome. So basically, and the other key thing is, keep in mind that by the time the way that this is implemented, you can actually start teasing apart the kinds of things that underpin the flow items, right? Whether this feature was actually a set of user stories, or this feature was just a design idea, or an experiment, or a mock-up that was created. So yeah, I think the key thing is absolutely apply the flow framework and flow time to work that's not making it to implementation, and then just be deliberate about the definition of done and still track flow time for it. But again, it is a different measure. So
great. Okay, we've got a question over here in the chat on Zoom. What would be the first thing you would do to measure value as a first step to provide visibility and gain adoption of agile visualization such as Kanban?
Right. So I think and then again, the flow frame is just meant to measure, and then you've got your more methodology and process-oriented frameworks like Kanban, like some of the agile practices as well. So I think the key thing that the flow framework says is that for each value stream, you need to have a measure, some kind of measure of value, which in the end, if you look at that, what it means is that everything, so let's say you've got that Kanban workflow, it means that everything that's flowing through the team that's pulling in the end, that's pulling work, implementing the work is somehow in support of those value metrics. So let's just say that, let's take a value stream that's a mobile application. It's delivering or a set of mobile applications or something of that sort. And let's say that the value metric we want for that, because it's a customer facing application, that could be daily active users, or it could be net promoter score, how happy people are with the application. So let's just say it's daily active users. And so what's happening now is that you've got that value metric that's specified for that value stream. It's of course examined every time that you're doing some kind of planning cycle, and you might have much more iterative planning with Kanban, but fundamentally you need to look at whether all of the things that we implemented through that pull system actually increase the daily active users. And that all the prioritization about what comes in, because in the Kanban system you've got a WIP limit, is that the things that actually make it through are the things that we believe there's a hypothesis for will actually be most likely to increase the number of daily active users. So the difference with the flow framework between the agile prioritization frameworks is that the value metric is set on the value stream itself. So you're not putting on, and this is, you can still of course do this. I know, at Tasktop we do this, where on every user story or feature there is some kind of value description done, right? There's we don't go as far as putting a business case on everything, but there's basically some value metrics defined on that user story, which is good for prioritization, for for making sure everyone knows what they're working on the story. But that's really at the agile framework and methodology level. On the flow framework, the value metric is on the value stream itself. So it's saying in aggregate, did all those things that we did, that we implemented, did they increase the value metric, like daily active users, or did they not? Are we implementing the wrong things? Did all those things that were put on all those user stories, all those features we're trying to implement, did they not move the needle? Maybe because we've got a competitor who's actually ahead of us and we don't realize it yet, or something of that sort, and people are moving to that competitor. So the key thing with the flow framework is it measures these value metrics and the flow metrics on the value stream, on that team of teams level. And this can be super helpful to understand, of course, whether what you're delivering is actually increasing the value metric, which for external things should be very much customer centric, or whether there's something else that's wrong with everything that's being implemented. So
great. Okay, we have another question over here on the Zoom chat, and might probably be our last question for today. Can you talk about granularity of flow items? When wanting to have enterprise-wide flow metrics, doesn't mean that we need to have or enforce consistency in what is a flow item, feature versus epic versus initiative.
Okay, so that's a very good and very sophisticated. It's a sophisticated question. It's something that we've been. So I did touch about it some in the book, but flow distribution, we've learned a fair amount about it in the last couple of years. So flow distribution is important, right? Which means that the ratio of you're looking at the health of a value stream, and value streams that have more net new value delivered to the customer, so they have more feature flow distribution, tend to make customers and everyone happier than the ones that are 80% defect flow distribution, right? So we know that. And the challenge can be with this granularity. This is an important distinction for when it comes time to implementing the flow framework. So, for example, let's say that all the feature work that you're doing is just massive business epics, right? And they take 2 releases to implement. And then you've got constant defect work. You can actually end up with 99 defects for every feature you implement. So sort of in the extreme. And then it's kind of what we call the apples and oranges problem, because they're not like-sized. So now the key thing is, and channeling Dominica de Grandes here, right? The whole point is that we're making work visible. So all of the work around that feature should be visible. All of the work around the defect should be visible. And then it's kind of a second order questions of how those things bucket up, right? Because we know that business epics or these bigger features, they tend to be broken up into separate user stories. Sometimes defect work will actually be combined into some bigger epic-like thing. Sometimes it won't. And so the key thing is, whatever you're doing, just measure it, look at it with your team, and the flow framework obviously encourages you to make these things be smaller batches. So it's when you're looking at these flow metrics, the last thing you want to see is that we're doing one feature every 6 months. Well, if everyone will scream, well, that's not what we're doing. We implemented a ton of things, right? This huge feature included all this work, included all these the different user stories and tasks and things we implemented. So just the key thing is just measure those. So just try to measure things at the same level of granularity. And it can be a higher level of granularity, it can be lower. It really depends what your processes are. It's Kanban processes are a bit different than the scaled agile or the Scrum processes here. But yeah, just do keep that in mind, is that for flow distribution to be meaningful, you want to be measuring similar size batches, and they should be there. And it's actually an anti-pattern of course, those big epics are not being properly broken down, because you want to validate those incrementally as well. So there's this kind of the gamification by design. My goal with the flow framework was that the gamification aspect was to encourage smaller batches. Where so often we see for the epic and feature work, the batches are just too big. And, whether it's user stories with a ton of story points or business epics that take span the release cycles or those kinds of things, use the flow framework to encourage the use of smaller batches for feature work.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mik. We've got just about 5 minutes left before we need to let you go. I was just wondering, you say you've learned a lot over the last couple of years since the book had been written and released. I wonder if you want to just briefly share a few key insights you've learned since the book was written.
Sure. So I think that I'm going to just, one of the key insights, and this speaks a little bit to this last question here by Julia, was this: we've been collecting these, and actually I've been working with another IT Revolution author, Dominica de Grandis, and also Carmen Diardo, on cataloging some of these things, where we're calling them flow diagnostics and flow dysfunctions. And so those to me have been the most interesting learnings, is what are the common patterns that we see, and what problems do they represent? So that last one, we actually call that the workflow obscurity pattern, and it's got different shapes and sizes. And that pattern basically shows us that, well, there's the decomposition of work is not visible enough. And by the way, a lot of the patterns do come back to this notion of making work visible. So that feature work really should have been broken up more, because of course the way it's being implemented, the way the coding is happening, it is being broken up. It's just not sufficiently visible. Another instance of the workflow obscurity pattern that's fascinating is that when workflows aren't visible. So, and this goes back, it's been interesting on this AMA how the flow time questions come up. So often the end of flow time it's the start and the end that's the problem. So the work will be called done before it's deployed. And then so we'll actually see in people's Jiras or Azure DevOps instances and the rest that there's this done state, there's these other kinds of things. It's if you're calling work done before it's been received by whoever's pulling from the value stream, say the customer, you've done it wrong. It's not done from the point of view of the flow framework until the value has been actually delivered. And so that's a very common workflow obscurity pattern where the dev team calls it done, but it's actually not been delivered. And of course, when we see that, it's just the case for DevOps, right? It's not done till then it's the story of DevOps, not till it's delivered. The most, I touched on this a little bit, the most surprising thing is that the work in progress, the flow load, is that just how bad it is across enterprises. And I believe, and this will be ongoing learning, I'm sure, but I believe it's because how much teams are being asked to change while they're being asked to deliver more. Mm-hmm. And if we think of the ideals, right, this notion of improvement of daily work, it also speaks to how rarely that's actually prioritized. So I know what we do, what we encourage is that part of every sprint, well, and ideally part of at least every release, there's capacity dedicated to improvement of daily work. And of course, then that leads to more focus, flow, and joy. But that's so important because that's what allows you to actually to improve, to make things go faster, to take those backlogs down. And the flow load just is the opposite of that, right? Is that the flow efficiency of teams we're just seeing it go down and down and down as more work is put on them, while they're trying to change by deploying new agile methodologies, DevOps practices, and new tools. They're adopting new new development frameworks and those kinds of things. So a new method and new tech stacks. So that's been, I think that's been so I think the most important learning I've had is that that's got to change. And I think we've got to use the flow framework again to make the economic case to break through that massive dysfunction of just teams and backlogs are completely too overloaded. Not enough capacity is going to making things better through improvement of daily work, through tech debt and the rest. And then we've got to, again, to tie it back to the beginning of this, as the people who are listening, who are on the technology side, we've got to help the business make the right decisions there by actually, again, making the economic case. So.
Excellent. Sounds like you have a lot of new material.
Yes, it's been piling up. That's true.
Mik, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. To everyone who's watching, thank you as well for your very insightful comments and questions. We'll be talking with Mik once more on May 12th, same time. So we'll pay attention to your email and over on Slack for the link to that. Until then, we'll keep reading and posting questions. We're going to be heading into part 2 and part 3, where things get very detailed and fun.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah. And thanks everyone for the great questions.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you on May 12th.